In this video, I want to talk about something incredibly important: your phone numbers. Now, phone numbers are one of the most overlooked assets in a real estate investing business. Most investors focus on scripts or they focus on their dialer, they focus on hiring callers, but they forget something fundamental. Your phone numbers are the gateway to every conversation your team has. And if those numbers develop a bad reputation with the carriers, your calls simply stop getting answered. So, in this video, I want to walk through three things that I think every investor running outbound calls needs to understand. First, I want to talk about phone number strategy. Second, we'll talk about behavior and how numbers actually get flagged. Third, we're going to talk about how to register and properly warm up your numbers so the carriers trust them. Let's start with strategy. Because before you can even think about dialing, you need to think about how your numbers are structured inside of your business. Now, most investors treat phone numbers as disposable. They buy a few numbers, throw them into a dialer, and when one gets flagged, they simply buy another. That approach can work for a little while, but eventually it destroys your contact rate and your deliverability. Now, the most professional operators that I see, professional operators treat their phone numbers as assets, and they organize them, broadly speaking, into three clear categories. The first category is high volume outbound numbers. These are numbers used by your cold calling team. They're numbers that are expected to make a lot of calls. They will rotate through dialing campaigns. They'll be contacting new prospects every day. Because of that, they naturally experience more stress from the carrier systems. So the strategy here is volume distribution. Instead of hammering one number all day long, you spread your dialing activity across multiple numbers in the same area code. This protects the reputation of each individual number as well as you can. It also goes a long way to improving answer rates because people are more likely to answer a number that looks local. Your dialer rotates those numbers so no single number carries all the load if you're using something like Smart Dialer. Think of these numbers like workhorses, right? They're built for outbound activity. But even workhorses need proper management. Now, the second category of numbers is what I would call inbound marketing numbers, inbound tracking numbers. People call them different things. These are numbers used in your marketing, right? Your website, your direct mail, your pay per click ads, your signs, radio, television, anywhere the public might call in. These numbers are incredibly valuable. Inbound leads, by far, are the most valuable leads that you're going to get. They have the highest buying intent. These numbers are also incredibly valuable because over time, you need them to develop trust. Now, the carriers see consistent inbound activity as good, real conversations, real engagement. And that creates a clean reputation for the phone number. That reputation is really worth protecting. So do not use these numbers for high volume outbound dialing. You do not blast thousands of calls from them. You keep them clean, you nurture them, you allow them to function as trusted entry points into your business. Now, the third category, most times that I see people break their numbers into, is relationship numbers, right? These are the numbers that your team uses for ongoing conversations with leads and sellers. Your follow ups, text conversations, deal negotiations. These numbers behave very differently from dialing numbers. They have a lower volume. Um, they have longer conversations, more two-way engagement. From a carrier perspective, that looks exactly like normal human communication, which is why relationship numbers tend to develop very strong reputations if you don't start using them as high volume number as well. Now, when investors separate their numbers into these three categories, something really great can happen. Each number develops a predictable pattern of behavior. And predictable behavior is exactly what the carrier systems are looking for. Now, that brings me to the second topic, behavior. Because the carriers are not judging your intentions, they're judging your patterns of behavior. The major telecom carriers are under an enormous pressure to stop robocalls and scams. So they run automated systems that constantly monitor how phone numbers behave. They look at things like call volume, answer rates, call duration, um, spam complaints, hangups, and your dialing patterns. They're essentially trying to answer one question: does this number look like a legitimate business communicating with real people? Or does it look like a spam operation? Let me give you an example. Imagine you buy a brand new phone number. Now, that number has been sitting unused for months, possibly even years. Suddenly, that number starts making hundreds of outbound calls in a single day. Very few people answer. Most calls last only a few seconds. What does that pattern of behavior look like to you? That pattern looks extremely suspicious to carrier systems. From their perspective, that's exactly how robocallers behave. So the algorithms react. Sometimes the number gets labeled spam likely. Sometimes answer rates simply collapse. But either way, your number reputation takes a hit. The frustrating part is that there's usually no warning. Your dialer keeps running, your teams keep calling, but your contact rate suddenly drops and you have no idea why. That's why behavior matters so much. The more natural your calling patterns look, the more the carriers trust your numbers. Which brings us to the third and final topic of today's video: how to properly register and warm up your numbers. Now, first of all, if you want the carriers to trust your numbers, and really in the US, if you want to do any dialing as a business, the first step is registration. Great news is if you're a smartphone customer, you can do all your registration inside of smartphone. And there are basically two types of registration. One is for voice, it's under what we call stir shaken. And one is for text messaging, which is under A2P 10DLC. And you do both of those inside of smartphone in our trust center, and you essentially have no choice. We register you immediately as soon as you verify your business for Stir Shaken, and then in the United States, all text messaging happens through the A2P 10 DLC registration. Um, Essentially, what happens when you register is you're telling the carriers who your business is. For A2P and DLC, you're telling them what type of messages you send and what your messaging use case looks like. Once approved, your numbers are recognized as legitimate business messaging numbers, but there is an important rule, certainly for text messaging, is your sending behavior must match the campaign you registered. So if your campaign says you're sending appointment reminders or lead follow-up messages, then that should be exactly what type of text messages you're sending out. If your behavior suddenly changes and looks like mass marketing or spam blast, the carriers will flag it. So alignment between your registration and your actual behavior is critical. Now, in addition to registering your businesses with Stir Shaken, your campaigns with ATP 10 DLC, it's really smart to register your phone numbers with the major caller ID reputation systems and carriers. And there are free services that allow you to submit your number as a legitimate business caller. We have links to them in our smartphone help center that you can use. These submissions feed information back to the carriers and help establish credibility for your numbers. It's a small step that can make a really meaningful difference in how your calls are treated. And finally, I want to talk about number warming. Because to me, this is one of the most important things you can do to keep your numbers healthy, which is whenever you purchase new numbers, you should never drop them immediately into a high volume dialing campaign. That is the fastest way to get them flagged. Instead, those numbers should go through a warm up period. I usually recommend around roughly a 2-week process. During that time, the goal is to demonstrate normal human behavior to the carrier systems. You start with very low call volume, maybe 5, 10 calls per number per day. Spread those calls throughout the day. Have real conversations when possible. Longer talk times do help to establish legitimacy. It also helps to generate some inbound activity, right? Team members calling the number, test calls, small amounts of two-way texting. You can use VAs for this. Anything that shows that the number is being used by real people for real reasons. Then, over the course of the next week or two, you gradually increase the activity 10 more calls, 15 more calls, and slowly build the number's reputation, the behavior. By the end of that warm up period, the carrier systems see a consistent pattern of legitimate business communication. At that point, the number is ready to enter a larger dialing campaign. Now, when you combine these three pieces together, strategy, behavior, and proper number warming, you end up with something extremely valuable, a phone system that the carriers trust. And when the carriers trust your numbers, your calls get answered. And when your calls get answered, your team gets conversations. And those conversations are what ultimately turn into deals.